There's plenty of space in front. So. Welcome back, guys. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this session will be our final session right here for our third day of Magic Academy Symposium. And this gentleman is actually the Chief Growth Officer and co-founder of SIEO. And he's a cool guy. Spoke to him on the dinner, welcoming dinner that day. Very good looking as well. And ladies, if you want his phone number, I've got it. And if you want his room number and the hotel he's staying, I got it as well. Put your hands together for Mr. Kyle Herron.
First of all, before I even take a moment to start diving into this presentation, let me just take a minute to thank all of you for attending this session, and more importantly, to the country of Malaysia for welcoming me and my team here. It's been an incredible experience so far. You have a beautiful country, and the most exciting thing about this country now is seeing the growth and innovation and entrepreneurship. Now, of course, you just heard an incredible speaker talk about some incredible things and how our society is shifting in so many different ways, but I think the thing that we need to start realizing and recognizing as people is there needs to be a philosophical shift that accompanies the shift in our economy and our workforce. I'd like to take some time today to discuss how we can respond to the changing world and changing society that we're seeing, and most importantly, how we can see the world beyond the box. As you know, the world is changing, and the job force is changing with it. In today's dynamic global economy, the most successful enterprises are not looking for workers who know a lot only about one thing. No, instead, they're looking for employees who are nimble, curious, and innovative. Because the reality is, as you all have now heard, the work done by lower-level accountants, computer programmers, engineers, lawyers, they're already being outsourced. And soon, they'll be done by computers. The reality is that the good jobs of the future and the great opportunities of the future will go to those who can collaborate widely, think broadly, and most importantly, those who can challenge conventional wisdom, precisely the capabilities of an entrepreneur. Now, I want to take a moment before we start diving into the depths of how we create this philosophical shift to talk about how that philosophical shift of seeing the world occurred in my life. As you can see here, I'm not special. I'm no different than anybody in this room. I've got a beautiful family, 2 younger brothers, a dog, and a picture of me when I was only 17 years old. Obviously, the beard adds a couple years on me. But it's true that I'm no different, and I'm nothing special. The only difference with me is that I took time to really understand who I am and understand how entrepreneurship was the opportunity to communicate my message in a whole new way, and most importantly, find a sense of fulfillment. Now, the logo you see up here now is the first college that I attended. It was a school in Northern California on the west coast of the United States. It was called St. Mary's College of California. I had a unique opportunity to go to this school because I was afforded this chance to play Division I rugby, a sport that I know is awfully popular in this part of the world. I had never intended to sort of pursue athletics as my full-time career, but I said to myself, why not give it a shot? Unfortunately, after going to this school, I had chose it for one sole reason, and that reason is what ultimately brought to my demise. I failed out of that school. I received a letter in the mail telling me I could no longer go there anymore, and I returned home thinking to myself, who am I? The individual that I was then looking at in the mirror was not the individual that I had recognized anymore, and there was this question of introspection that continued to haunt me in the sense that who I wanted to be and who I actually was were becoming far and far apart from each other. A problem that seems to face many of us in our modern life, the existential crisis, as some may call it. And what had always sort of occurred to me is that I had been living a life that seemed predestined. It was a path that was conventional, that was laid out for me by my parents, by authority figures, by my teachers, and it really didn't seem like I was actually utilizing my time in the most effective way, but instead I was only trying to please those around me and those that I looked up to. And so when I think about one of the great innovators of our time, I think of Steve Jobs, a man that you all know, a man that has changed our society for now and for many years to come. And what he says is that your time is precious. In fact, it's so precious that you should never waste it living someone else's life. It's your responsibility to live for you. It's your responsibility to feel fulfilled in everything that you do. And entrepreneurship, I believe, is the answer to that question of fulfillment. So for me, it was really it was a process of analyzing my life. I had recognized that there were so many other individuals who were trying to guide my path that I needed to go back to the core roots of who I was as an individual. And so I said to myself, I need to find a way to make money doing what I love. As you know, that's the core of any entrepreneur. It's really finding a passion and then turning it into a career. And so for me, I knew that my passion was music. If you knew me when I was in my early teen years, you would know me as the kid who had headphones on every single day, listening to every single song that seemed to come on the radio. It was my passion, but for many, many years, it was only my hobby until the initial switch came in my brain that this could be something more than just a daily activity. And so the key message that I really picked up in those formative years of my life was the necessity of building a brand around myself. See, the truth is, in today's world, we all have social media accounts. We all have people to report to. We all have responsibilities. In many ways, we as individuals are no different than a company. And so because of that, we need to start to treat ourselves like a company. This is the first step in that path towards entrepreneurship, and most importantly, the first step towards true independence is building a brand around yourself. Now, how do you do that? There's 3 key components of building a personal brand that I've implemented into my life and have allowed me to achieve and succeed goals that I had set for myself as a young man. Step number 1, your personality. Your personality is something that follows you everywhere that you go. Whether it's in your digital life or your daily life, your personality is something that must extend through literally every action you take. Now, how do you do that? First and foremost, you cannot have a significant dissonance or disconnection between who you are as an individual and who you are in your online life. Unfortunately, we live in a world now where people judge us far before they ever get the opportunity to physically interact with us. And because of that, it causes an unfortunate level of judgment. That the one way to solve that is by sort of creating this personal brand around you as an individual and treating yourself, as I mentioned, as a company. Step 1, having that personality follow you wherever you go. Step 2, really understanding your core values as an individual and representing them in all aspects of your life. I like to always kind of analyze myself on a constant basis through a process of introspection and say to myself, what are the just three things that I believe in, and how can I truly live them out in every action I take? From brushing my teeth in the morning to going to bed at night, how can I represent those values in my digital life and my daily life? And lastly, and what I think is most importantly, is your image. This is something that's key to every entrepreneur, and again, not just as an individual, but as a company. Consistency is unbelievably key. I remember one of the most interesting classes I took while I was a young undergraduate student in college was a class called Strategic Branding and Messaging. And what this class basically indicated to me is the importance of consistency, because without consistency, you start to have a disconnection between who you are as an individual and how the world perceives you. So an easy way to fix this problem of image and consistency is think of things like your social media platforms or your company's social media platforms. Set a base of guidelines and live within those guidelines. Be creative within those guidelines. But for example, with a company, think of your color, think of your typeface, think of your logo. Think about how you express those on every platform where people can view those. Your LinkedIn and your Facebook should not be that far apart from each other. Your Instagram and your Twitter should not be that far apart from each other. If I land on any of your social media accounts, I should know that you are the one representing that account. Again, your digital life is so unbelievably scrutinized now that it's necessary to have that consistency in every aspect of your digital life and back through your daily life. So for me, building that personal brand, the first step was something very simple, and it was my first true step into the process of entrepreneurship. That was through the creation of my first company called Wings to the Minds. It comes from a quote by my favorite philosopher, Plato, which says, "Music gives soul to the universe, wings to the mind, flight to the imagination, and life to everything." So I pulled a bit out of that quote, and instantly that became sort of the name of my first company. Now, it wasn't a real company. It was a blog and a radio show and some sort of music label. It was really nothing, but it gave me an opportunity to express who I truly was in an online medium. And again, I cannot continue to stress the importance of that enough in the reality that people will make judgments on you long before you get the opportunity to shake their hand. Whether you're in Malaysia or whether you're in the United States, whether you're in Europe, whether you're anywhere in the world, your digital persona permeates everything that you do. So the first step for me was Wings to the Minds, and the next step was the creation of my legitimate first company, which was called Beats for Better. Beats for Better was a concert production company that sort of had a philanthropic twist to it. We would donate 10 to 15% of all of our profits back to charity, and that's when the entrepreneurial bug began to form. I was embracing this feeling of independence and innovativeness, and all of a sudden I felt like I was back in control of my own destiny. Yet at the same time, I was accompanying this growth of entrepreneurship with climbing the corporate ladder. At that time, I had worked for 3 major corporations. I had worked for USC Keck Medicine, which is a large health organization in Southern California. I had worked for Disney, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and I had worked for Sony. And I knew that my love for music was something that I could pursue in my professional life, so I ended up at a record label called Columbia Records. Columbia Records manages artists like Adele and One Direction and Beyonce and some of the biggest names in the world. And so I got so close to touching what I love and so close to thinking that I had achieved my dream, then I realized that after working all the way to the top, I really just wanted to be at the bottom. I wanted to be in a place of control. I wanted to be back in the driver's seat of my own life. And most importantly, I wanted to see my destiny in front of me and know that I was the one writing my story and sort of guiding my path to whatever my long-term goal was in life. These are precisely the capabilities of an entrepreneur, as I indicated before. It's gaining that sense of independence and innovativeness, which I'll touch on a bit later in this presentation. See, now in that moment, I had 2 choices. One was to continue my journey up the corporate ladder, work for 10, 15, 20, 30 years before I finally made it into a position that actually fulfilled me, or I could stop everything I'm doing and take the biggest risk in my life. Yet what I recognize in this process is that the biggest risk is actually taking no risk at all. Tolerance for risk must be extremely high amongst startups and entrepreneurs, but even more importantly, in the changing economy that we face today, it is unbelievably necessary to be open to risk, to be excited about risk. Because the reality is, and something that I continue to stress to all those in my life, is that you can continue to reinvent yourself. I've failed in my life hundreds of thousands of times, if that, and every time I pick myself up, and yet again, I fail forward. In that moment, I took that risk, and I answered the call of the entrepreneur. And from that point in my life forward, everything and anything I did had suddenly changed. All of a sudden, my perspective on the world was drastically different. I was open-minded, I was kind, I was creative, I was interested in innovating, because I knew that I was in a place where I was the one making the decisions for myself. There was no authority figure looking down on me. It was 100% driven by me. And so the question becomes, how do we all embrace these ideologies in our own lives? And what I ask is that, why isn't it you too? I know I stand in front of a room of many, many founders and entrepreneurs and CEOs, but the reality is that it's not about being a founder or an entrepreneur or a CEO. It's about the philosophical perspective and the way that you sort of see the world, seeing the world beyond the box. Now, what impresses me more than anything about this country is that Malaysians are kicking ass, and please excuse my French, but I'm continuously impressed by your culture, and it goes to show that innovation is not only occurring in places like Europe and the United States, but no, it is occurring in this country, and it is continuing to occur in this country, especially with the advent of organizations like Magic, where we are at today. So let's look at 3 incredible stories of young entrepreneurs and CEOs that made it out of this country and now are making a global impact. The first is Miss Ling. She's the founder of Grab Taxi. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Grab Taxi. You've probably used it once or twice before. She was a Harvard Business School graduate. And while she was in Harvard Business School, she said to herself, I'm seeing Uber and Lyft pop up. Keep in mind, this is back in 2012, relatively when those services were somewhat smaller. And I want to inspire and empower the market of taxi drivers. And so what she said is, let's create a platform. Let's create an on-demand taxi service. And now, just a few years later, at age 27 years old, she is absolutely revolutionizing the way that we ride and the way that we transport ourselves. And at just this young age, she's in 26 cities with 110,000 employees that she has the luxury and excitement to manage. But that's not all. There's also my good friend Ian. I call him my good friend because I feel like I know this young man. He's someone that I would love to spend some time with because just like me, he got his first business off the ground where he was in college. It was a business called Herron, and he recognized that there was a high demand for cosmetic, e-retail locations throughout Malaysia. And so what he said to himself, let me go and embrace this problem. Let me define a solution to this problem. And we'll talk about a little more how we can do that as a society a bit later in this presentation. But just 5 years ago, when he was 22 years old, he decided, hey, let me give it a shot. He got together with a few friends. He built a website. He did a little bit of marketing. And just 5 years later, now he has 150,000 active users, and he leads the Malaysian cosmetic e-retail space. My point being with this is that it can be you. It doesn't require you to change the world with everything you do. What it requires is making an impact on at least a small amount of people. Realistically, 150,000 people, it doesn't even amount to the total population in our society. But something that Elon Musk often refers to is that, as I mentioned a second ago, it's not about creating an idea that revolutionizes society. It's about many people creating many ideas that revolutionize small portions of society. And we take this strength and numbers approach together, and all of a sudden, we can create waves of change. So let's close on this last one. This is Mr. Khalil. Excuse my pronunciation. I am American after all. 29 years old, founder of Incitement. And Incitement is a platform that has always excited me. Why? Because it's a global social event platform. What it does is it allows volunteers and corporate sponsors to link with social causes and help to push them forward. Again, this was just a problem that he was seeing in his local neighborhood, and basically what he did is he found members of his friend and family group, simple as that, and he went to local business and said, hey, there's a huge problem in our society. There's a lack of water, there's a lack of resources. Let's work together and combine our money and our talent and our hard work and see if we can push this cause forward just a bit. Again, it doesn't take a lot to make a change, it just takes enough. The reality is we have to start thinking like these individuals. We have to start to be willing to define the problems in our world, see the problems in our world, and then act on those problems in our world versus just pushing them to the side. Because the reality is that the future of the workforce is simply never going to be the same. So let me ask the audience, this logo here, does anybody recognize it? Anybody? Nobody knows what that is. That's the part that concerns me the most, because the reality is that this logo right here belongs to IBM Watson. IBM Watson is IBM's supercomputer in artificial intelligence, and it is dramatically changing the way that our workforce is going to look over the course of the next 20 years. In fact, it is so powerful and so smart that it will take jobs away from current students who have been studying for 10 or 15 years. Let's just look at a few highlights of what this thing can do. It won Jeopardy. How many humans can say they did that? It wrote a song. Again, how many humans can say they did that? Just these two alone is impressive to me. It has the brains to win Jeopardy and the creativity to write a song. Incredible. Produced a movie trailer, managed an entire HR department of a company. Who's to say it won't manage an entire company in the coming years? It worked on cancer treatments and was able to basically do research at hyper speed in comparison to a human. And it wrote its own language and communicated with other artificial intelligence bots. My point being here is that we're going through a massive transformation as a society. And this is only one example of artificial intelligence that is reshaping the way that our world operates. But that's not all. The humans are responding in a fascinating way, and here's how I challenge you to respond. It's the three core components of what it takes to be an independent and innovative thinker. You don't have to be an entrepreneur to be independent and innovative, but what you do need is to collaborate widely and be willing to work with anybody and everybody from any part of society. That's why I have the luxury of standing here today, because I will be pursuing a relationship with Malaysia. I will continue to help to innovate this country, and I encourage you to look around the world into the areas that need you, because believe me, every single person in this room has immense value. In addition to that, it requires us to think broadly and not just look at the narrow scope of what occurs in our day-to-day activities. And then, of course, and most importantly, we have to be willing to challenge conventional wisdom. We can no longer follow the traditional paths that have been laid out for us. Instead, we need to redefine the paths, just as I indicated I did in my own life. So while the workforce is changing, and while humans are undergoing this philosophical shift of the lens in which they see the world, we're also experiencing a massive shift in our economy and how people are working. So let's just look at the US for just a moment. The gig economy, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, it's often referred to also as the on-demand economy. These are things like Grab Taxi, as I mentioned a moment ago, Uber, Lyft. The number of people, and keep in mind, this is in the US, working on-demand jobs in 2017 is that 3.9 million Americans. By 2020, it will be 7.7 million Americans. And by 2021, we're looking at 9.2 million Americans leaving the traditional workforce to pursue a more independent and entrepreneurial lifestyle. But that's not all. And it's not just the United States where we're seeing this massive shift. We're seeing this in the global economy. We're talking about the entire world. 1/3 of the workforce is participating in the gig economy. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that everybody is abandoning their jobs, but what it means is they're picking up side jobs because they're recognizing that their current jobs are being overtaken. And lastly, and in my opinion, most importantly, the skills are growing. We're now looking, and again, this is just a hyper-focused group in the United States, but it's representative of our society as a whole, where computer scientists are simply on the rise. The engineers and innovators and hard thinkers of the world are moving quite rapidly, where we're seeing a 30% annual growth rate in just the last 15 years alone. My point with this is that the world is setting us up to be an entrepreneur. Not only is the workforce changing and the economy shifting, but the resources and the human capital are there for us to be entrepreneurial. And so we need to begin to embrace this reality because whether we like it or not, this is the way the world is moving right now. And that brings me to the company that I have the luxury of presenting to you today, my company, CEO. Now, CEO at its core is a startup that helps startups start up. But we're now moving out of the startup phase because we've had the opportunity to work with so many young founders and entrepreneurs. What we do is we pair software and professional services to every key pain point that an entrepreneur experiences. Because what we recognize more than anything is that it's very hard to build a team, it's very hard to trust that team, and more importantly, it's very hard to get things done and know what to get done. That's where CEO comes in. Now, the way CEO all really came to life is myself and the other co-founders of this company analyzed the state of entrepreneurship, and we said to ourselves, there's really just a handful of key ingredients that builds an entrepreneur. Now, we've talked about them quite a bit through this presentation, whether it be challenging conventional wisdom or thinking broadly, but it really comes down to independence and innovation, two key concepts that I love to reiterate. And in addition, you sprinkle on a little bit of execution, and all of a sudden, the basis of what it means to be an entrepreneur is born. So with CEO, we seek to inspire that, but what we really want to do is empower people to understand that it's okay to be a little crazy. It's okay to be a little different. In fact, it's okay to be a little foolish. For many years, the crazy folk of our society, some of the great thinkers were always looked down upon. Think of the Steve Jobs of the world, think of the Albert Einsteins, the Thomas Edisons. So many individuals that for so many years were scrutinized because they were so advanced and so far ahead of their time. But what we need to recognize as a society, and more importantly as an entrepreneurial culture, is that we have to love these ideologies and embrace these principles in everything that we do, again, from the minute you wake up to the minute you go to sleep. Now, to be an entrepreneur requires a couple things. It requires the philosophical shift. It requires recognizing that the world is changing. And then it also means recognizing that the world has a lot of problems. And frankly, a lot of the problems have not been solved yet. But you, and I mean you specifically as the individuals in this room, have the power to solve these problems. And let's talk about how we find a problem. It's not always as easy as it may seem, but oftentimes it's easier than it may seem. First and foremost, find something you're passionate about. You can talk to any VC, any angel, really any investor on the planet, and they will not throw a dime into your venture unless they see sheer passion coming and escaping your soul the minute you walk into the room. And next and most importantly, once you find an area of this world that you are passionate about, you need to start to analyze it and look for issues. Now, the example that I tend to fall back on is I think of the individual who created the electric toothbrush, right? It's a silly concept, to be quite honest, but he experienced an extremely small pain point in his life. He didn't like the physical action of brushing teeth. He said to himself, there's probably an easier way to do this. Why? Because I'm lazy. I don't want to brush my teeth. I want to have a robot do it for me. And all of a sudden, this incredible multi-billion-dollar patent was born only because he analyzed the most simplistic of his daily activities. Point being, it doesn't require a mountain to be moved for a great idea to be formed. And the minute you identify that issue, you've defined your problem. The next question becomes, how do we solve that problem? What I like to do is a very basic exercise. I simply get a piece of paper and I identify 3 primary causes of that problem. and then I identify 3 primary solutions. Now, these solutions that I'm mentioning now don't necessarily need to be brilliant. They don't need to be realistic. They just need to be whatever your imagination can come up with. Because believe me, there is a realistic way to achieve some of the craziest concepts in the world. Now, once you've identified a solution for each one of these 3 problems or 3 causes of the problem, you build your concept. And then you ask yourself a series of 4 questions. Am I truly passionate? And again, you've heard me emphasize passion so much. As you can see with me as an individual, I'm a very passionate person. I encourage you to be passionate people because passion is what drives innovation. It's what moves our country and our society forward. Next, is the concept unique and original? Frankly, I don't like to tell entrepreneurs that, hey, your idea isn't worth it, or hey, someone else is already doing this, but I don't want you to waste your time either. I want you to challenge yourself to be original and to think in an original fashion. And if you can't do that, then come talk to CEO and we'll tell you how to do that. Next, and most importantly, will the cause be better from what I'm doing? Am I able to actually better this problem? Am I able to actually solve this problem? Or am I simply sort of throwing icing on the proverbial cake? And then, of course, is this realistic? As I mentioned to you, some of the craziest concepts and craziest ideas in the world are extremely realistic to achieve, but there are some that technology just simply hasn't caught up with. And it's something we need to keep in mind as we let our imaginations run wild in the space of entrepreneurship. And then, of course, the most key component, now that you've defined your problem, you've created your concept, you need to form your team. And I know this is a huge challenge amongst entrepreneurs. In fact, I've even heard that in the Malaysian culture, it's extremely challenging to find the team that you can truly trust. So I always fall back on a very, very basic principle, which is that you hire character and you build skill. People can be taught many, many pieces of knowledge, but they cannot always be taught to be a good person. And so I always say that you don't necessarily need to have a bunch of great scientists on your team. Oftentimes as a founder and as a CEO, you just need someone that can give you a thumbs up and say, hey, you're doing a great job, that can pat you on the back and help you move forward. It sounds silly, but trust me, when you are a founder of a company or a co-founder of a company and you're putting in 16, 18 hours a day, it's nice to have someone on the side who's saying, hey, what you're doing is going to change the world. Hey, what you're doing is great. And ultimately remind you of your mission and your passion, because oftentimes after working long hours, it can be forgotten. But ultimately, when you're thinking about building a team, there's really 3 key components that I look for in every team member that I've been able to bring on to our company's CEO. Honesty and trust. Transparency is so unbelievably key in business. If you can't have people that are on your side and you can trust, you fall into a lot of difficult issues. For example, I was just reading a LinkedIn post before I came in here of an individual who had received $50,000 US in angel investment money. And the next day, his co-founder said, hey, I'm going to go use this to build the product. And 3 weeks later, the money was gone. The product was not built. He looked at his credit card bill and had noticed that there was a charge for an Audi, dinner, tickets to a big sports game. My point being is if you can't trust the individuals around you, your company does have a massive, massive threat to fall apart. Grit is extremely key as well. As I mentioned to you, the traditional entrepreneur is going to push and he's going to fight and they're going to put in the unnecessary hours, and you have to be willing to push through the barriers and walls that face you. And then passion, I can't hit on that enough. As I've mentioned, it's more than just money. It's more than just putting dollars in your pocket. It's really about using your brand as for whatever message you're trying to express. So how we do it with CEO today is we pair services and software to every key component of the entrepreneurial journey. We look at it really in 5 key buckets. There's the ideation phase, the validation stage, the planning stage, the building stage, and the growing stage. And I would be more than happy to discuss what each one of these mean with you after this presentation. At our core, what CEO does is we have 3 key legs of our business. We have products that we build, we have professional services that we use for our clients, and then we have a philanthropic impact side of our business. With our Spark service, which is our professional services, we basically offer every startup service that you could possibly need all under one roof. Whether it's legal and financial services or idea validation or team building, we do it all, and we do it all in one house. We also have a new project that'll be coming out just within the next couple of weeks called Rate My Investor, which allows you to discover, rate, and interact with investors, and more importantly, brings a sense of transparency and balance to the startup ecosystem. Because we know that investor interactions aren't always fun, and oftentimes it's necessary to spread the story to others around you. Of course, with our impact program, our philanthropic program, we had the luxury of working with a group of high school students to build an app called Present. This app allows high school students to check into classes, and in return, they receive points for doing so. Those points can be redeemed for rewards. It's an incentive-driven system, but it's been incredible to work with some underserved communities in the West Coast of the United States. We also work with an organization called Girls Inc., which helps to inspire and empower young women internationally. The reason I touch on these issues is because I'm not special, I'm not super talented, but I was someone that was willing to put in the work. That's really the core component of being an entrepreneur. You put in the work and beautiful things will come beside you, as indicated by the different projects we get the opportunity to work on and the different impacts we get to make in our society. But one of the things that always seems to resonate with me is that because I'm not talented, because I'm not super smart, because I'm not super special, I've recognized that relationships are key to building any business. Whether it's a partnership, whether it's a friend, it's always necessary to go out and show your business and brand to the world, because the law of 6 degrees of separation tells us that you're only one handshake, one conversation, one email, one meeting away from living your dreams. And so what I want to end this presentation on is a couple key points. And that it's okay to not trust the system. It's okay to challenge conventional wisdom and thought. It's okay to be you, embrace you, and love you, because without a sense of self-fulfillment and self-awareness, you will have a very hard time pursuing the path towards entrepreneurship. And most importantly, it's okay to be passionate, it's okay to show your emotion, and it's definitely okay to embrace what you love. Because truthfully, if you don't do it, someone else will. There are billions and billions of individuals on this planet, and trust me, many of them have the same idea that you've always had. It's the question of who's gonna get there first and who's gonna pursue that idea with the most vigor and passion, because believe me, that passion will seep through, and any competition that doesn't share it with you, they're no longer going to be competition. The golden circle theory, what it states is that the key components of building a business are this, and I do encourage all of you to go to YouTube, watch Simon Sinek's talk on the golden theory. What he basically says is that it starts with the why, it starts with the reason, it starts with the cause. Why are you doing what you're doing? Once you know the why, the rest becomes very easy. You move to the how. How I'm gonna do what I'm going to do is typically through the medium of entrepreneurship, as we all know. And then lastly, the what. What's your product going to be? What's your concept going to be? But again, I reemphasize that it all relies back on the meaning and why you're going to change the world and why you want to change the world, because believe me, the rest will come quite easily. In doing this all, you will have the luxury of seeing the world beyond the box. You will have the luxury of leaving the conventional and traditional path, and you will have so many unbelievably fortunate opportunities that come your way. It's that sense of internal fulfillment that really drives us forward as humans. And so what I challenge all of you today is to think different. As Apple and Steve Jobs has always said, look beyond what you think you see, look beyond the box, and most importantly, recognize this. Being an entrepreneur, being a CEO, building a business, it's not scary. Elon Musk, one of the greatest innovators of our time, he always falls back on this key quote, which is, I don't really know what a business is. In fact, all a company is just a bunch of people who are working together to create a product or a service. But truthfully, there's no such thing as a business. There's simply a pursuit of a goal. So today, I ask all of you to find that goal, pursue that goal, pursue it with passion, and most importantly, challenge yourself each and every day to see the world beyond the box. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. We'd like to open the floor for any questions, and I believe we have a question over there. And of course, Kyle came all the way from Southern California, so yeah, better not lose this opportunity.
Yes. Hi, thank you very much. My name is
Absolutely.
William from Monash University, Malaysia. So I actually have two questions, if you don't mind. So the first question is that, in your opinion, because earlier on, one of the startup that you're working with is actually using the incentivizing method, right? So in your opinion, what do you think about incentivizing people to improve themselves? especially towards the Gen Y, young millennials, basically? Like, do you think that it can actually improve themselves, or like it doesn't? It doesn't. If it
Incentivize people to improve themselves?
Yeah, correct.
Absolutely. In fact, there was a business that came across my plate not too long ago that its intention was to reward people for good deeds and good activities. I think people oftentimes are incentivized more from external pieces of their life versus their internal drive and motivation, as sad as that may seem. So from a business perspective, I absolutely think that makes sense.
But in terms of practicality, will that actually cause like a misuse of that app or like misuse of that technology? Like people will just want the reward, doing it for the sake of the reward, basically.
I think it depends a lot on the nature of the company itself and how the company is structuring the incentive program. I can say that I could certainly see where you're coming from. I think the biggest difficulty that we've faced with building companies like that is the accountability process of it and actually ensuring that the individual has reached whatever goal that allows them to incentivize themselves. So talk to me afterwards and I'd be happy to discuss it in more detail.
Sure. Okay, my second question is actually more towards CEO, like because I can see that you are actually helping out right starting from the ideation stage, right? So
Right.
how do you actually monetize from that? Like, are you charging these people, or like, yeah, if you don't mind me
Yeah,
asking.
absolutely. So
Thank you.
basically our monetization model is very simple. We charge people fee-based services in the initial phase and we help them get their business off the ground. What we're really good at is building strong businesses that can go raise money and then can go make money in the world. So what we start with is actually fee-based services, and then we potentially move in towards like an equity stake type of model where we work even more closely and intimately with these companies. Any other questions?
Ladies and gentlemen. Well, if you feel shy, you can always go on Facebook Live and you can ask a question. And I believe you can always get in touch with him, Carl at co.io.
Yep, absolutely. And in addition to that, if you'd like to download the presentation, the link is just here. And of course, I'm always happy to chat with founders and entrepreneurs. I know that it's not an easy path to take. I know that there were a lot of sort of big philosophical concepts thrown up here, but really at the end of the day, there's one key component, and it's hard work.
And this opportunity, having him here live, it's not easy to see Kyle every day. So in Malaysia, I think he loves Malaysia, right? You like Malaysia?
Oh, I've loved it here. Yeah, absolutely.
So, any more questions? We do. Well, same gentleman, all right. I think you keep the mic. Just go ahead and ask all the questions.
Yeah, so sorry, since no one is asking, right? So
No,
I think
please.
this question actually applies to everyone. It's just that maybe some of them are shy. How do you actually incorporate like a passion of yours towards a teammate? Like together, like for example, let's say I have the idea and I need a team, right? So let's say I found someone and say, hey, want to go for this idea, but how I can actually realize his true intentions in terms of that idea, or like he's just working for that idea, or like to look cool and stuff.
I think it's
Thank you.
extremely difficult, to be honest. I think the most challenging thing that entrepreneurs face, and I'm sure many of you can echo this sentiment in the room, is that building a team is hands down the biggest barrier to having a successful enterprise. In my opinion, building a young team, the easiest way to do it is to build it around your friends and your family. Honestly, the individuals that you've trusted over the course of your entire life. And the biggest thing too is that if you have a great idea, people will come to you. They're not going to necessarily come to steal your idea, but what they're going to do is they're going to come to you and have the intention of wanting to work with you. I do find there are some ill-intentioned entrepreneurs that exist, and certainly people that are in it just for revenue and money. But to be quite honest, those sort of concepts, they'll be indicated to you within the first few months of working with the person. I always say there's about a 3-month window that you allow someone to basically work on your team, work on your company. If you don't feel like they're reaching your expectations within those 3 months, they're not worth a spot on your team.
Thank you. Again, next question. Why not, since he's here? One final question. Oh, yeah, we do.
Hi, just a bit about your company. CEO just operates online, or it operates on in United States only? And do you do services in Malaysia? And do you look for partners to collaborate? And perhaps do you collaborate with the government in Malaysia in particular?
Yes to almost every one of those questions, actually. We are an international company. We do operate in 3 countries at the time, and we're looking to expand to Malaysia. Of course, the interesting thing about entrepreneurship in today's day and age is that it can be entirely digital. So we're excited to continue to work with Malaysian teams, and most importantly, we're really looking forward to building a synergy between our company and the Malaysian government. We do recognize that innovation here is continuing to be on the rise, but what we feel like needs to be put into place is an extremely strong infrastructure and system of processes to ensure that the companies coming through this country can be successful. Because quite frankly, what we see too many times is the fact that 90% of startups fail globally, and most of those startups fail within the first 3 months from inception. And so the way we solve that is, again, going back to what I mentioned earlier, this concept of the entrepreneurial journey, where we really try to walk a startup through all of the necessary early stage steps. In many ways, it's sort of like an assembly line or a factory for startups, and we hope to work closely with the Malaysian government so that we can implement a similar system here in your country.
Thank you for the question, and I have a Facebook Live question right here from Austin Stoffer. What's the number one problem you see early stage startups face?
I mean, I think that I've continued to emphasize this a few times before. A lot of it falls on the team, truthfully. And then I think the execution as well. There are a lot of great teams that simply are far too unbalanced. So how often do we see a college team of a bunch of computer scientists that all go to build a company and they never have the business know-how to actually execute on their vision? Or how many times do we see companies who have too many businessmen and they have no technical co-founders? I think a lot of it relies back on the team, and when you have an unbalanced team, you have a much lower chance for and opportunity for success. And in addition to that, as I've indicated a few times here before, it's just that stage of execution. I think it's fun to be creative. I think it's fun to be innovative. I think it's fun to be independent. But the most challenging thing that a lot of startups face is that they have a lot of people with great ideas, but they don't have a lot of great people who are willing to execute upon those ideas. So when you're building out your teams, try to find those individuals who are willing to just simply look down and, as we call it, bang on the keyboards and actually make real things happen.
Thank you, Austin. I hope that answers your question. And one final from the auditorium before we close the session.
Right
we
down
do have
here.
one. Yeah, we do.
Thank you for the session. And I would like to ask you, what is the greatest challenge you find in startup?
The greatest challenge that I find with startups?
Yeah.
Again, I think I see a few different primary areas of startups that where they struggle. I think one, as I've emphasized here a few times before, is just unbalanced teams and people that can't execute. But I think in addition to that, something that we're seeing quite a bit, especially on the West Coast of the United States, is there's too many people trying to do the same thing over and over again. And I think without that sense of innovativeness, you fall flat on your face when you have 30 companies doing the same thing. And so when I mentioned earlier in this presentation the need to be unique and original with your idea, I impress that upon so many of the young entrepreneurs that we work with, because if there's a big company, say like a Facebook or an Instagram, actually Facebook owns Instagram, but a Facebook or a Google or an Apple that can literally make one update to their software or one update to their company and all of a sudden crush your idea, it's probably not worth starting. In fact, there was a previous startup that I worked on called Filter, FLTR, and Filter wanted to create basically sort of like a machine learning algorithm fused with Yelp. And so we had moved pretty deep in the process. We had raised funding. We had basically the majority of the software built. And then one day, Foursquare, as you know, Foursquare is a massive, massive company. They made literally one software update and our entire company was crushed. And all of a sudden, my company that I'd started had fallen into the statistic that 90% fail. So I do challenge many entrepreneurs to recognize that there are a lot of big players who are looking at small companies. Oftentimes they want to work with them, but what I find even more often than not is that they would much rather just crush those companies and push them out of the way.
Thank you. From FB Live, from Leanne. Would you say that Kickstarter has helped with these startups?
Would I say that Kickstarter has helped with startups?
Would you say that Kickstarter
Yeah.
has helped with the startups?
Kickstarter is an interesting platform. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. It allows you to crowdfund companies. So essentially, I could go put CO onto Kickstarter, and then thousands of people around the globe could contribute small amounts of money towards it. I think it's effective, but it really depends on the kind of company that you're creating. I do have a lot of entrepreneurs that come to me and say, hey, I'd like to start a Kickstarter campaign. But any of these crowdfunding sites are extremely, extremely difficult to work on because you basically have to manage them on a daily basis. You have to continually update your audience, and you have to have massive, massive marketing campaigns behind them. So when you're creating a product or a service or a company that serves a philanthropic need in society, I find that Kickstarter is extremely effective because it can resonate with the individuals that may use your service in more of a personal or empathetic way. But when you're looking at Kickstarter being used for primarily revenue-generating companies, I don't see much success with it. So I always encourage to look other routes. I do encourage a lot of individuals to try to bootstrap their companies as much as they can, unless you really need funding and you're a cash cow and that you're burning a bunch of cash, you're not a cash cow. I'd encourage you to find a way that you can make money on your own. It's oftentimes easier than you think. And then, of course, when you're looking for that additional growth funding, going to an angel or to a VC is reasonable.
From Ganesh Mahindranathan. How do you convince startups to pay for these value-adding services when most are bootstrapping with limited funds?
That's a great question. And so this is something that startups ask us almost all the time because, of course, we charge for each one of our services, and they ask, how can we afford it? I think there's something that many startups miss, and that it's not always the most difficult thing to raise early-stage capital for your company. In fact, I was listening to Shahram yesterday, who's the head of international growth at Tinder, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with him because he's spoken here the last couple of years. And he basically said, when you're looking to raise capital, there's one key thing you need to do, and that's make your company seem real. Ideas are very, very difficult to validate, and they're even more difficult to pitch. Even a great salesman has a hard time just telling someone about something. They need to physically show them something. And so what I always encourage young companies to do before they begin to engage with services or they actually begin to engage with other team members or actually hire people onto their team, go build a pitch deck, go build a prototype, show that you're actually building something that's legitimate and real, and get people excited. You know, one of the things that I tend to rely on is the importance of good design. I look at this presentation because I'm very proud of our design team, but you need to have aesthetically appealing, human-centered brands. If you can do that, it becomes instantly easier to go and raise the initial round of capital, which typically comes from 3 different sources. Many people refer to them as the 3 Fs. There's family, their friends, and their fools. I typically say don't raise money from fools because you want to have people who are relatively vested in your company. So I look at family and friends to raise that first round of capital after you've already created a pitch deck and a prototype. And then from that point, it's not always that challenging to go out and raise $10,000 to $20,000 US. Once you have that money, that's typically all you need to really launch your business to a point where it's investable or it's market ready.
Thank you. And one final one from FB Live. From Amar Faris, what is the essential mix of skills in a founding team? Essential mix of skills in a founding team.
No, that's another wonderful question. I think it varies by team. One of the things that I think is most important is that you need the dreamer, right? You need someone who can ideate and really think beyond the box, as I've indicated here. You need the doer, you need the individual who's actually gonna go and execute these crazy ideas that the dreamer has, and then you need the designer. I fall back on design so much because I recognize the importance of a brand in everything that we do, whether it's our personal brand or whether it's our company's brand. So really the key mix you're looking for is a dreamer, a designer, and a doer. Once you have those 3 components, you go find a technical co-founder, assuming that you're building a piece of software, and you can launch your company.
Thank you for the question. And ladies and gentlemen, once again, put your hands together for the Chief Growth Officer and the co-founder of CEO, Mr. Carl Herron.
Thank you very much. I'll be here afterwards if you'd like to speak to
Yeah,
me.
he's exactly going to be here. Like I said, he came all the way from Southern California. Thank you, and nice meeting you again.
Absolutely.
And I hope to meet you again in future.
Of course.
If you didn't want to ask the question early on, but you want to have a one-on-one, a quick one, yeah, you can actually talk to him right here. So thank you so much, Carl, and thank you, everyone. This is our last session right here. Don't forget, at 5:30, we have the one-on-one with all the mentors. The mentoring session is held at CWS at 5:30. And also the survey forms.